My partner became a global superstar using my voice, my songs, and my soul. When I stopped being his ghost, he and his manager boyfriend framed me as a stalker and buried my career in lies. I died in a gutter, but I woke up in the body of the industry's biggest joke. They thought they stole my life, but they forgot one thing. I'm the one who wrote the music, and now I'm going to make sure the whole world hears how talentless they are without me. Let me be precise about what happened. I wrote every song Kang Sang-yu ever released. Every single one. From the debut EP that moved 800,000 units in its first week, to the stadium anthem that was used in 3 separate World Cup broadcasts, to the slow ballad that made him cry on national television twice. I wrote that ballad in 40 minutes while sitting on a bathroom floor with a fever of 39.5 degrees. I remember because I kept checking the thermometer. I wanted to know if the fever was affecting the chord progressions. It wasn't. I also sang the guide tracks, all of them. Here is what a guide track is for people who don't know. When a composer writes a song, they record a rough version of it first. They sing the melody, the ad-libs, the runs, the breath placements, everything. This is the guide. The real artist then listens to it and records his own version. That is the standard process. Sang-yu never recorded his own version. His voice is a B-flat tenor with a 3.5 octave range on paper. I know this because I tested it during our 3rd month together, when I still believed he wanted to learn. He does not use that range. He cannot sustain a note past 4 seconds without his pitch drifting sharp. He has a habit of pressing his tongue against his upper palate when he is nervous, which cuts the resonance from his chest voice entirely. In a studio, with pitch correction, auto-tune, and a good engineer, you can hide this. On a stage with backing tracks and careful choreography to keep him out of breath, you can hide this. The method was simple. I recorded the guide, the team mixed it to sound polished. Sang-yu lip-synced to my voice on every live performance, every broadcast, every award show. The backing track played, his mouth moved, the world heard me. I was fine with this for 2 years. I was not fine with it anymore when I found out that the credit for every song, composition, arrangement, and lyrics had been quietly transferred to a shell company owned by Choi Do-hyun, Sang-yu's manager, Sang-yu's boyfriend, the man who, over 18 months, had systematically removed my name from every legal document connected to the music. I found this out by accident. I was reviewing a publishing statement. The royalty figures were wrong. I traced the discrepancy. It took me 4 hours. At the end of those 4 hours, I had a folder on my desktop containing 47 documents that proved I owned nothing. I called Sang-yu. He answered on the 3rd ring. He sounded like he had just woken up. It was 2 p.m. I told him what I found. I used numbers. I cited document reference codes. I kept my voice flat. He said, "Jihan, you're overthinking this. Do-hyun handles the legal stuff. I don't really understand it." I said, "You don't need to understand it. I need you to call Do-hyun and tell him to restore my credits within 48 hours. There was a long pause. He said, "I think you should come talk to us in person." I should have known then. I went anyway. The meeting was at Polaris Entertainment's main office building, 17th floor. Conference room with a glass wall. I remember the glass wall specifically because when I walked in and saw 3 lawyers sitting beside Choi Do-hyun, my first instinct was to check whether the door had closed behind me. It had. Do-hyun is 34 years old. He manages 6 artists. He looks like someone who sleeps 8 hours every night and never raises his voice. This is because he is not a calm person. It is because he has learned that quiet men in expensive suits close deals faster than loud men do. He slid a contract across the table. I looked at it. 32 pages, dense text. The summary was this. I would sign over all remaining creative rights to the shell company. In exchange, I would receive a one-time payment of 50 million won and a non-disclosure agreement. If I signed, I would be erased cleanly. If I didn't sign, the existing contracts, which I had signed without proper legal review 2 years ago because I was 24 and in love and stupid, gave them the legal standing to argue that I had been a salaried employee, not a co-creator, and was therefore owed nothing. I looked at Sonyu. He was sitting at the far end of the table. He was looking at his phone. I said, "Put the phone down." He put it down. He looked at me. He had the expression of someone who has rehearsed an emotion they don't actually feel. He said, "Jihan, this is just business. You can start fresh, write for other people." I picked up the contract. I tore it in half. Then I tore each half again. I stacked the pieces neatly and put them back in the center of the table. I said, "I'll see you in court." I walked to the door. Do-Yun said, "Jihan, you should know that we've already spoken to several journalists." I stopped. He said, "There are statements from 3 staff members who are willing to testify that you have been sending Seyanu threatening messages for over a year. There's a restraining order ready to be filed. There's also a very clear social media trail, one that my team has prepared that will support the narrative of a delusional composer who became obsessed with a celebrity client and began claiming ownership of songs he had no real hand in creating." I turned around. He was smiling. Not big, just enough. He said, "Sign the contract, take the money, and this all goes away quietly." I said nothing. I left. 22 hours later, I was trending on every major platform. The hashtag was #SayYunHoo Stalker Alert. The narrative was clean and well-sourced. A troubled composer, a terrified celebrity, a years-long obsession, fabricated song credits as a manipulation tactic, screenshots of messages edited but convincing at a glance, a statement from Seyanu's agency expressing concern for his safety and mental health, a statement from Seyanu himself, 3 sentences posted to his fan community page using the words "scared" and "boundaries" and "I only want peace." 12 million fans read that post within 6 hours. I checked my bank balance. 0, because the company had frozen the accounts tied to our shared production work. I checked my inbox. 240 messages, none of anyone I wanted to hear from. I checked my phone contacts and called my entertainment lawyer. He said, "Jihan, I have to be honest with you. The documentation they have, even if it's fabricated, is going to cost more to fight than you currently have access to." I said, "How long would a case take?" He said, 2 to 3 years, minimum, and that's if we win. I said, "Thank you." I hung up. I sat on the floor of my studio apartment. The studio equipment was mostly rented. The lease was up in 3 weeks. I had 1 unreleased track on my hard drive, a song I had been working on for myself, not for Sonwoo. A track I had never sent to the label. My name was on it. My voice was on it. I called 3 independent labels that week. 2 did not return my calls. 1 took the meeting, listened to the track, and said the timing was, unfortunately, complicated given the current news cycle. I posted the track myself on an anonymous SoundCloud account. It got 43 plays. Over the next 4 months, I watched Sonwoo win 3 major awards using my songs. I watched Do-Yun stand beside him on red carpets. I watched the fan edits and the magazine covers and the sold-out world tour announcement. I ran out of money. I ran out of options. I ran out of people who would return my calls once they Googled my name. I was 31 years old, sleeping on a friend's couch when I collapsed from what turned out to be a combination of malnutrition and a cardiac arrhythmia I hadn't known about. I didn't wake up in a hospital. I woke up on a vinyl floor, cold. I could smell instant noodles and cigarettes. The first thing I did was check my hands. I do this out of habit, a composer's reflex. Check the hands, make sure the fingers are all present, joints mobile, tendons uncompromised. The hands were wrong. The fingers were longer than mine. The knuckle on the right index finger had an old scar that I did not recognize. The nails were bitten down to nothing. The back of the left hand had a small tattoo of a music note, the kind you get when you are 19 and want instant noodles and cigarettes. Something to someone. I sat up. I was in a small apartment, single-room, efficiency kitchen, walls covered in faded performance schedules and a poster of, I had to look twice, Kang Seiyunu. I reached over and took the poster down. I put it face down on the floor. There was a mirror on the wall beside the bathroom. I stood in front of it. The face looking back at me belonged to Lee Moo-jae. I knew this face. Everyone in the Korean entertainment industry knew this face for exactly the wrong reasons. Lee Moo-jae, 23 years old, former trainee at Daishin Entertainment, made his public debut 2 years prior as a solo act, released one mini-album of songs someone else wrote, performed on 2 music programs, forgot the lyrics on live national television once, forgot the choreography on a second broadcast, was caught on an open microphone before a stage saying, "I don't even want to be here." The clip went viral, he became a meme within the week. The agency dropped him within the month. Since then, 2 years of radio silence. One reported attempt to re-enter the industry that ended after a disastrous audition tape was leaked online. Current public status? Confirmed punchline. The fan community name his anti-fans had given him was The Void, because, as they put it, watching him perform was like watching nothing happen in real time. I stood in front of that mirror for approximately 2 minutes. Then I opened my mouth and sang a C major scale. I stopped at the 4th note. I went back to the beginning. I sang it again slowly, paying attention to what I was feeling inside the instrument, the chest resonance, the soft palate position, the airflow through the nasal cavity. I ran through the scale again, then a chromatic scale, then an arpeggio pattern, up and down, 3 octaves. I sat down on the floor. Here is what I found. Lee Moo-jae had a lyric baritone that had never been properly trained. The lower register had a natural, unforced depth, a C2 bottom note that most baritones would require years to access. The upper passaggio, the transition zone between chest and head voice, was chaotic and undisciplined, which explained every cracked note in his short public career. But the raw material above that break, the head voice, the falsetto bridge, had a clean, clear resonance. Slightly nasal, but correctable with placement work. The breath support was poor, the muscle memory was essentially zero. The technique was that of someone who had been taught choreography first and singing second, which is exactly what Daishin would have done with an idol trainee. But the instrument itself, the bone structure of this voice, it was workable, more than workable. I got up, I looked for a notebook. I found a crumpled receipt and a pen with dried ink. I pressed down hard until the ink started moving. I wrote down everything I had observed about the vocal mechanism in the last 12 minutes. Then I looked around the apartment for food. I found half a bag of rice, 2 packets of instant broth, and 3 energy bars with wrappers that suggested they had been there for some time. I cooked the rice. I ate. I thought. I had one advantage that no one in this industry knew about. I knew what the next year of Sonu's release schedule looked like. I had written it. Specifically, I knew that in 6 weeks, Doyin had been planning to release a song I called, internally, The Signal. I had composed it entirely. Never sent it, never finalized the guide recording. Doyin knew the song existed because Sonu had mentioned it during one of their calls. I had overheard. They had been trying to locate it in my files after my public collapse. They had not found it. It lived on an encrypted hard drive that was currently in a storage locker I had prepaid for 3 years. I didn't have the hard drive. I had something better. I had written it. I remembered every note. I opened the only laptop in the apartment, 4 years old, screen cracked along the top right corner. I checked what software was installed. There was a cracked, outdated version of ADA. It would work. I checked Lim Woo-jae's social media accounts. The follower count on his main account was 12,000. The comments on his last post from 8 months ago were, "Still alive, lol? Did he fall off the earth yet?" and "Nobody asked, but okay." I checked his bank account because his phone contained the banking app with a saved login. Balance? 430,000 won, about 320 USD. I checked his remaining performance contracts. There were none. I checked his pending legal obligations. There was a small debt to Dacian Entertainment for training costs, partially waived, that he was paying off in installments. Current outstanding balance? 1.2 million won. I wrote all of this down on the receipt. Then I pulled up a job listing site, found 3 private vocal instruction positions, applied with Woojay's profile listing the one certification he had from a youth music program at age 14. One responded within the day. Cash, 3 sessions per week, teaching basic vocal technique to a middle schooler preparing for a school talent show. It paid enough to keep the electricity on. I accepted. Then I sat down in front of the cracked laptop and started building the track. Rebuilding the signal from memory took 11 days. I will not pretend this was easy on the equipment I had. The laptop's audio interface was the built-in sound card, which introduced a 12-millisecond latency that I had to manually compensate for on every recorded layer. I used Woojay's phone as a secondary microphone. I treated it by hanging it inside a closet full of old clothes, which functioned as a rudimentary vocal booth. The song itself, a mid-tempo, trap-influenced R&B track with a modulated bass drop going into the second chorus, key of F minor. I had written it to showcase a very specific vocal trick, a falsetto to chest voice drop on the word signal in the hook, landing on an E-flat that requires controlled breath pressure to not crack. I had designed it for my own voice, then adapted it for Sonu's supposed range. Except Sonu couldn't have hit it anyway. The guide was always going to be the finished product. I couldn't use my old voice. I was in Woojay's body now. So I adapted it again. I transposed the key down a minor third to D minor to center the hook in Woojay's workable lower range. I rebuilt the falsetto moment as a falsetto to mid-voice glide instead of a drop, using the natural instability of the passaggio as a stylistic choice rather than a flaw. In the right context, a controlled crack sounds like emotion. I put it in the right context. I worked on the vocal take for 4 days, 6 hours per day. I was running Woojay's body through technique drills it had never experienced, which meant the first 2 days produced nothing usable. By day 3, the muscle memory was starting to form. By day 4, I had a take I could use. I mixed it on the cracked laptop, I mastered it with a free plugin and careful EQ work to compensate for the room's terrible acoustic properties. The result was not perfect. The low end was slightly muddy because the apartment sat above a laundry room with a ventilation hum at 60 Hz that I couldn't fully isolate. It was, however, undeniably the same song. Anyone who had heard Sonu's other tracks, which I had also written, would recognize the compositional fingerprint, the syncopation pattern in the percussion, the way the pre-chorus stripped down to just bass and breath before the hook, the specific use of a 7th chord resolution in the bridge. These were my signatures. I had used them consistently for 3 years. Any music analyst worth anything would identify them. I uploaded the track on the last day of the 11th week under a new account name, frequency_0. The profile picture was black. The bio was empty. The only post was the track, with a single line of text. They know who wrote this. The signal doesn't care if they listen. I did not promote it. I did not post it anywhere else. I went to sleep. When I woke up, it had 2,300 plays. By the following evening, 47,000. By the end of the week, 380,000, pulled almost entirely by music communities, not casual listeners. The discourse that erupted was exactly what I needed it to be. Music producers recognized the compositional style. They started putting names to the fingerprint. They started pulling apart Sonu's back catalog and finding the same patterns. A thread on a music analysis forum titled, "Did One Composer Write Everything Kang Sonu Has Ever Released?" accumulated 14,000 comments in 3 days. Sonu's agency responded quickly. They released a statement saying the track was a low-quality imitation and that legal action was being considered against the anonymous uploader for deliberate stylistic mimicry intended to deceive the public. I read the statement 3 times. Low-quality imitation. I noted this. I filed it for later. On the same day as their statement, I uploaded a second post. Just text, no audio. Imitation. Interesting word choice. Let me ask, which version came first? I'll upload the timestamp files next week, every session log, every MIDI file, every dated draft. They have my old hard drive now, or they think they do. They should double-check which hard drive they actually took. I did not own the other hard drive. I was bluffing on the logs, but I knew Do-hyun well enough to know what he would do next. He would immediately have someone pull every drive from their server backups and start looking for inconsistencies. That process would take manpower and time. It would also, critically, put their legal and PR teams on the defensive at a moment when I needed them distracted. The actual play was still 3 weeks away. I spent those 3 weeks drilling. 6 hours of vocal work per day, 3 hours of piano. The apartment had no piano, so I taped out a keyboard diagram on the kitchen table and practiced finger positioning with silent muscle drills. Then rented 30 minutes of practice room time at a nearby music academy 3 times a week. The breath support deepened. The lower register, already strong, became precise. The upper mid-voice, which had been the unstable zone, started holding pitch consistently past the 4-second mark. Woo Jae's voice was not my old voice, but it was becoming something real. In the 4th week, I received a message through the Frequency Zero account from a scout at a production company called Hanul Media. The message was brief. "We know who you are. We'd like to talk." I replied, "Then you know I'll choose my own terms." They agreed. I went to the meeting, not as Seo Jihan. Seo Jihan was legally a harasser and a fraud, according to the media record that still existed. I went as Lim Woo Jae. The scout looked at me across the table the same way people always looked at Lim Woo Jae, with the particular blankness of someone who does not expect to be surprised. By the end of the meeting, she had a different expression. I played her the track on my phone. Then I told her who composed it, who arranged it, and why it sounded like every Kang Sonu single from the past 3 years. I told her about the contract, the shell company, the fabricated social media trail. I didn't yell, I didn't perform. I gave her document numbers and file names. She said, "We'd need proof." I said, "I'll get it. What I need from you is a platform." She said, "What platform?" I said, "Axis." Axis Vocal Resurrection was the highest-rated survival music program in the country. 40 contestants, 12 weeks, weekly eliminations. The voting split was 60% public, 40% judges. The show had announced its mentors 2 weeks prior. There were 4 of them. Third on the list, Kang Sen-yu, appearing in what his agency described as a generous effort to give back to emerging talent. When I read this announcement, I was eating rice at Woo Jae's kitchen table. I put the chopsticks down. I looked at the announcement for a long time. Then, I picked the chopsticks back up and kept eating. I applied for Axis through the open audition process. 12,000 people applied. The preliminary selection was handled by Hanul Media, which produced the program. The scout I had met, her name was Director Park, was part of the selection committee. Lim Woo Jae's application had a 93% rejection probability based on his public track record. I knew this. I had designed the audition to overcome it. The audition was held in a practice room with 3 cameras and a panel of 5 judges. The room was small, acoustically live. The walls were hard, which amplified resonance and exposed any pitch instability clearly. I chose to sing one of Sen-yu's songs, specifically the ballad I had written while sitting on a bathroom floor with a fever, the song that had made him cry twice on national television. I sang it in its original key, the key I had written it in, not the key it was released in. Sen-yu's team had transposed it down a full step to accommodate his range. In its original key, the bridge contains a sustained A4 note that resolves to a G sharp, a resolution that sounds effortless if you know where it's going because you wrote it, and nearly impossible if you are approaching it cold. I sang it in its original key. I did not announce this. I simply began. I watched the judges' faces on the 3rd bar when they recognized the melody. I watched their expressions change in the bridge when the A4 sat clean and resolved exactly where I intended it to. When I finished, there was a pause. One judge said, "That's a different key than the release." I said, Yes. She said, "How did you know it?" I said, "Because I think about music a lot." I was selected for Axes. The show's structure placed contestants in teams based on vocal type. I was placed in the baritone tenor bridge group, contestants whose voices straddled two categories. There were 7 of us. The first week's mission was a cover assignment. Each team was given a catalog of songs to choose from. The baritone tenor group's list included, predictably, several Kang Seonu tracks. I chose one. I told my team members that we were going to rearrange it, strip the production down, no beat, no bass, no pitch direction, piano, voice, and air. One of them said, "That's risky." I said, "I know the song better than anyone alive. It isn't risky for me." I arranged a 4-part a cappella version of the track, with myself on the baritone lead and the other 3 members on harmonic support. I wrote out the parts by hand and gave each member a personalized practice instruction sheet based on what I had observed about their individual technical weaknesses in the first 3 days of rehearsal. None of them had ever received instructions like that before. They practiced hard because they could feel, technically, that the instructions were precise and correct. Our performance aired in the 2nd episode. The real-time reaction tracker, visible on the broadcast, moved upward and stayed there for the full 3 minutes. After the episode aired, Lim Woo-jae's social media following went from 12,000 to 280,000 overnight. The comment majority was variations on, "Where has this person been?" and "Something is different about him." One comment, buried in the thread but noticed by enough people that it was screenshotted and circulated. "This is the same compositional phrasing as frequency OV." I noted the timestamp of that comment. Filed it. The following week, Seonu arrived on set as mentor. I had not seen his face in 11 months, not in person. I had seen his face on screens many times, award stages, magazine covers, the holographic display at a bus stop near Woo-jae's apartment that showed his tour advertisement every 7 minutes. In person, he looked the same, well-rested. The particular looseness of someone who has not carried guilt long enough for it to leave a physical mark. He was introduced to the contestants in a large rehearsal room. He walked the line. He stopped in front of me. He looked at me, at Woo-jae's face, for approximately 3 seconds. Nothing. No recognition. He said, "Good energy," and moved on. I breathed out through my nose. Good. That was the only outcome I needed from that moment. The show's 4th week introduced the wildcard format. One contestant from each group was selected by the mentor to receive a solo showcase slot. Seonu selected me. I know why. In the preceding weeks, my scores had been the highest in my group. His team would have told him to pick the top performer for optics. The mentor who selected the eventual winner would benefit from the association. He took me aside after the announcement. He said, "I'm going to give you a song to perform, one of mine. I want to see what you can do with it." He named the song. It was one I had written. The title, in English, Hollow. I said, "I'd prefer to perform an original." He looked surprised. Mentors didn't usually get pushback from contestants who ranked first in their group. He said, "Original material is a bigger risk. The public votes partly on familiarity." I said, "I understand the risk." He studied me for a moment. Then he said, "Fine. You have 2 weeks." I said, "I only need 1. I used the week to write a new song. I will be specific about what I built. The song was in A minor, slow build, tempo at 76 BPM, dropping to halftime feel at the 2nd verse. The central lyrical theme, in plain terms, a warning delivered in the voice of someone who has been silent long enough that the silence itself has become the loudest thing in the room. I titled it Frequency. Same word as the anonymous account, same word that music analysts had been using in their threads about the compositional fingerprint connecting frequency to Seonu's catalog. The bridge contained a direct melodic quote from The Signal, the song I had uploaded anonymously. 4 bars, unmistakable to anyone who had heard it. The quote was brief enough to be deniable as coincidence. It was not coincidence.
When I performed it on week 5 of Axis, I performed it live. No backing track for the vocal, piano only, played by the show's music director who I had personally briefed on the arrangement. The judges panel for this episode included an external guest critic, a music journalist who had, in a previous life, written one of the early articles about the supposed Seon-Hee-han stalker story. I had not arranged this. It was scheduled. I simply noted it and adjusted my framing accordingly. I stepped to the center of the stage and sang frequency from beginning to end, without a backing track, without pitch correction, and without choreography. I did not close my eyes. I looked at the cameras. In the bridge, when the melodic quote from the signal appeared, I saw the guest critic's head come up, saw her eyes narrow, saw her write something on the notepad in front of her. The vote came in at 94.3%, highest of the season. Seonu, sitting in the mentor's chair, was applauding along with everyone else. His expression was the expression of someone trying to decide whether they are in danger yet. They were. The show's finale format required each mentor to perform a duet with their selected finalist. This had been publicized from the beginning of the season. It was a marquee moment. Seonu's team had agreed to it. The production had locked it in. The performance would be fully live, no backing tracks permitted under the broadcast rules, which had been written in response to a previous controversy about pre-recorded vocals on a different survival show 3 years prior. Fully live. I want to be precise about what this meant for Seonu. His entire 3-year career had been built on my recordings playing through speakers while his mouth moved. He had never, not once to my knowledge, performed his own vocals in an uncontrolled live environment. His team had managed every appearance to allow for the backing track, award shows, music programs, promotional performances, always with the track, always with the safety net. The Axis finale was 90 minutes. The duet was the last segment, broadcast live to 8.4 million viewers. The production team announced a no backing track format for all finalist performances 2 weeks before the broadcast. It was framed as a celebration of raw talent. It had been framed this way for 3 prior seasons. Sonwoo's agency filed a quiet request through production to allow technical support. The request was denied on the basis of format rules. His team accepted, presumably on the calculation that they could manage the performance with careful arrangement, a key that stayed within his comfort zone, limited sustained notes, heavy use of the duet structure to cover weak moments, with my voice carrying the load. They sent me the duet arrangement 3 days before the broadcast. I looked at it for 60 seconds. Then I filed it in Woo Jae's email trash and wrote my own. The arrangement I sent back was built around a specific trap. Sonwoo's strongest zone was the E3 to B3 range, a baritone comfort zone that required almost nothing from him technically. He could sing in that range without issue. My arrangement pulled him out of that range exactly once in the final chorus. The final chorus was written with a moment that required him to sustain a full voice E4, the note just above the first passaggio, for 6 counts, then resolve upward to an F4, then down to a C4, landing cleanly on the beat. 6 seconds, a simple figure. Every competent tenor on the planet can do this in their sleep. Sonwoo could not. Not live, not without the track, and not without my voice in the speaker telling him where to go. I sent the arrangement to the show's music director. I presented it as my contribution to the creative collaboration. The director reviewed it and approved it. It was sent to Sonwoo's team as the agreed arrangement. His team made one small modification. They tried to move the key down a step, D4 to E4 instead of E4 to F4. I told the director the lower key would conflict with my lead vocals range. I asked to keep the original. The director, who at this point was operating on the assumption that I was the most technically competent contestant on the show, agreed. The arrangement was locked. 2 nights before the finale, Director Park from Hanyeo Media met with me privately. She had, in the intervening weeks, verified enough of what I told her in our first meeting to be carrying a specific expression. The expression of someone who has been sitting on a story and is deciding exactly when to let it run. She had the original session logs from 2 San Wu tracks, obtained through a source inside the previous studio. The logs showed that the final vocal files used in the release were identical to the guide tracks, not separate recordings. She had a former sound engineer willing to go on record. She had financial records connecting the shell company to Do-hoon's personal accounts. She said, "We're ready to run it. The question is timing." I said, "The night of the finale, not before." She said, "Why not before?" I said, "Because I want Sanwoo to walk onto that stage believing he still controls the narrative." She thought about this. She said, "And if he refuses to sing?" I said, "He won't refuse in front of 8.4 million live viewers. He spent 3 years telling those people he's a singer. He will stand at the microphone and try." She said, "And when he fails?" I said, "That's when you run it." Finale night. I stood in the stage right wing, 40 meters of backstage space between me and the main stage. I could hear the crowd through the floor, 2,000 seats, every one filled. Sanwoo was in his dressing room. I had passed it on the way to warm up. His team was around him, 3 stylists, his publicist, Do-hoon, and 2 people I didn't recognize. Do-hoon and I made eye contact for half a second through the open dressing room door. He didn't recognize Woo Jae's face as a threat. That was the last calculation he made correctly that evening. The performance order. I performed Frequency solo first as the finalist showcase, then the duet. Frequency landed the same way it had in week 5. Better, maybe. Woo Jae's body had been in training for 4 months by this point. The passaggio was not just stable, it was beginning to develop a characteristic texture, a quality that the sound engineers had started boosting in the mix because it read interestingly on broadcast. After my solo, the host introduced the duet segment. He made the expected speech about what it meant to perform fully live, about vulnerability, about artistry. Sonu walked out. 8.4 million viewers. The crowd in the room was warm for him. He was still, for most people watching, a global star doing something generous by appearing on a domestic survival show. He stood at his microphone. He had his performance smile. He was wearing an earpiece. I stood at mine, 6 feet between us. The piano intro began. I watched his eyes when the first bars played. He was listening for the backing track, the ear monitor mix, the safety net. There was no backing track, just piano, 2 microphones, and the room. We came in together on the first verse. I carried the harmonic bass. He sang the melody in his comfort zone, E3 to B3. This was manageable for him. His pitch drifted slightly by the 3rd bar, sharp on the sustained notes, flat on the resolutions, but nothing that an untrained ear would catch in the moment. I let the first verse pass without pushing. Second verse, I began layering in the counter melody, more movement in my line. The arrangement was pulling his eye line to me as the harmonic anchor because I was moving. He was following the piano's lead. This was intentional. I needed him tracking the piano, not the backing track that wasn't there. The pre-chorus dropped to halftime. His voice thinned. The resonance left his chest. He was pressing the tongue against the upper palate, his anxiety tell, the one I had cataloged years ago. His pitch was now running consistently half-flat. The cameras caught it. You can't hide pitch drift from a broadcast mic in a quiet room. The chorus arrived. I sang the hook in full voice and clean. The crowd reacted to the contrast before they could name why. Then the final chorus. The piano dropped to a single held chord. My line resolved and moved to the harmonics. The spotlight on the stage narrowed to a single beam on Sonu. He had one phrase.
E4, sustained 6 counts, resolve to F4, drop to C4. He drew a breath. I could see his shoulders. He began. The note came out wrong on the first count, not catastrophically, but wrong. His chest voice hit the E4 and then immediately began drifting up, overshooting the pitch by nearly a quarter tone, the voice cracking at the 2-second mark as it tried to compensate. He pushed harder. The pitch went sharp, then compressed, then broke entirely on the 4 count, the note collapsing into a half-voiced, unsupported sound that died before the resolve. The piano held its chord.
The silence was exactly 2.3 seconds. Then the crowd began murmuring. Not booing, not laughing. Something more complicated and more devastating. The specific sound an audience makes when they are recalibrating their understanding of something they believed was real. Sionu looked at me. I held the final harmony and let it resolve cleanly. I looked back. He could see in my face that this was not an accident. He did not finish the song. His team cut the broadcast feed to a technical difficulties card 11 seconds later. The clip of those 11 seconds had already been captured on 4,000 phones in the venue. It was online before the technical card even appeared. Within 20 minutes, it was the top trend on 3 platforms. The headline on Director Park's story, which went live at 11:47 p.m. Exclusive: 3-year investigation reveals Kang Seonu's entire discography recorded by Ghost Composer. Shell company fraud, fabricated defamation campaign detailed in full. The story named names. It included the session log timestamps, the engineer's statement, the financial records, the original documentation of the defamation campaign, including the names of the journalists who had been fed the fabricated stalker narrative. By midnight, Do-yeon's name had been added to a police report for fraud. By 1 a.m., Seonu's agency had issued 3 separate statements, each contradicting the last. By 2 a.m., the Frequency account had 4.2 million followers. I am writing this at Woo Jae's kitchen table. The cracked laptop is open. The rice is cooked. The Sunwoo poster is still face down on the floor. I haven't decided whether to throw it away yet. I'm not sentimental about it. I'm just not done with everything it represents. The legal process has started. I am not Seo Jihan on paper. I do not fully understand the mechanics of what happened to me or why I woke up here. I don't plan to waste time on that question. What I know is that I have Woo Jae's identity, Woo Jae's body, and a career that is being built from zero. The credit dispute for the previous compositions is a different battlefield, one that the lawyers are handling. What I have is this. A voice that is becoming something, a catalog of songs in my head that no one has heard, an audience of 4.2 million who followed an empty account because the music made them feel something real. There's a label meeting next week. 3 of them. Not the kind of meetings where you sit across from a lawyer and watch a contract get slid toward you. The kind of meetings where they ask what you want. I know exactly what I want. I want a recording budget, a studio with a proper acoustic environment, and a release timeline that I control. I want full compositional credit on everything I produce, under my name, in perpetuity. I want the contracts reviewed by my lawyer before any signatures. And I want a live performance slot. No backing tracks, no playback, no safety net. Just a microphone, a piano, and the frequency that was always mine. They called it ghost music. Ghosts don't write back. I do. The end.